So today as you heard in the prayer, we're wrapping up our series, Repairing What's Broken. And as you recall, throughout this series, we've been looking at the life of this guy named Nehemiah. And it's kind of funny that we're spending so much time looking at the life of a guy who lived 2,500 years ago. And why would we do that? Well, I think what it comes down to is that, as I kind of mentioned a bit last week, that one of the things that helps us do anything better is to have a chance to watch people who have done it well. We talked about sports last week. And I think that one of the things that Nehemiah shows us is how to live life well. Nehemiah shows us how to live a deeply impactful life. And the thing that Nehemiah shows us is that although the culture we live in now says the way to have an impactful life is to be the biggest and the loudest and the strongest and whatever. And what Nehemiah shows us is that that's not the case. Nehemiah shows us that the way that we have a life that really has impact is that we focus on other people and we focus on how we can touch other people's lives and that we invest in other people. And as we invest in other people, their lives begin to change. And as we are part of that process, that in turn changes our life. And what we see in Nehemiah's life is an incredible journey of one man. Remember a few weeks ago when we started this series, Nehemiah was a servant. Remember, he was part of that exiled nation of Israel. But then he heard something that broke his heart, that there had been this joyous event of the exiles being allowed to go back to Jerusalem, and that broke Nehemiah's heart. Because as they went back, they were really excited. And then when people got there, life was not as good as they thought. That the wall that surrounded their city, the thing that was key to the security of a city in the ancient world, that surrounding structure had been damaged. And the people, instead of living a full life that they had hoped for, are living hard lives, hurting lives, unsafe lives. And Nehemiah made a decision to be a part of the solution. We know that Nehemiah prayed for them, but he didn't just say, God, go fix it. He said, God, I think there might be a path for me to be part of the solution. God, show me what that is. Show me how to have success here. God, give me success in this endeavor. And that's what he did. And so what we see happen in Nehemiah's life is something that I think it's actually hard for us to even fully take in how much happened so fast in Nehemiah's life. In a matter of months, a man who starts as a servant makes a trip to journey to lead the repair of this wall. And then a problem they had been battling for generations is suddenly solved in just months. And he got to be a part of that. Now, he didn't do it all by himself. He engaged the help of the king. He engaged the help of the people. But he's the one who stepped into what was going on and says, I'm going to do the work to bring the pieces together. And I'll trust that God will lead me through it. So he achieved in months what had not been achieved in generations of trying. So the thing that we want to take away from Nehemiah is Nehemiah shows us that one life really matters. That one life, one person, willing to hear God's call on their life and step into it. So can do what so many people before them could not do. So basically, he recognized something important. The reason he succeeded, this is my opinion, what I'm about to say. The reason he succeeded where others had failed, the Bible doesn't say this specifically, but I think the text shows us. The reason he succeeded where others had failed, because his focus was on people. Everyone else had been focused on other things. And Nehemiah realized that people are what matter. People are the path to changing things, to changing your own life, enriching their lives. The focus has to be on people. People are what matter. His personal success was not his goal. Achieving more stuff was not his goal. That wall was not important to him at all, except for the fact that it was a tool in protecting the people. It was always about the people. So as he got there, he didn't run up and go, whoa, there's that wall. I'm going to be the guy who's remembered for fixing this wall. What he said was, these people are hurting and they are dying. And I'm going to step into that. And I'm going to do what I can to bring health and life back to them. And the thing is that when he got there, what he saw was there was a key need that they were lacking. They were lacking security and safety. So he started by doing the thing that was most necessary. And the thing is that as Nehemiah got there, he could not possibly have known all the things that these people would ultimately need. So he started with what he could see. He got there and he said, they need security. Let's give them security. That's certainly going to improve their lives. And he gave them that security. And the thing that's important for us to remember is that it's his people focus that allowed him to move and do things that caused us to remember him. That if he had just gotten there focused on the wall, what would have happened? He would have fixed the wall, kind of done a touchdown dance, and run out and say how great I am. But he was focused on people. And because he was focused on people, when he got there, yes, he had to meet that need of security. So he gave them security. But because he focused on people, he looked at them as people, and he realized that they had deeper issues beyond that. Security was important. That had to be done. But also, as he got to know the people, he began to understand how beaten down these people had become. He got to understand how broken the lives of these people had become. So he knew that just providing security wasn't enough, that more was necessary. So what he did is that he actually looked at them again as people. He goes, well, people don't just have physical needs. People have emotional needs. In order to have a life that's healthy, a life that's productive, we have to be emotionally healthy. So as we talked about, he recognized that these people had lost any sense of self-worth. So he worked with them to help them understand that they are valuable, to help them understand that he values them, to help them see that they could be part of something important, that they could be an important part of something important. And he showed them that they were important to other people as well. And he showed them that they were important to him. So as he went through, he stepped through and he met the most immediate needs, security, but continued to invest in them. Because he understood that in order to bring healing into their lives, he has to heal the whole person. He has to invest in them beyond those kind of most obvious needs. You have to keep investing. And one of the things after he got there, and he worked with these people, and he dealt with providing security, and he gave them emotional strength, he recognized that there was something else that was missing. He recognized that these people had no relationship with God. So he had to help them find that as well. But here's the thing to notice. He didn't lead with that. Because if people are starving, they can't hear what you have to say about God. Right? If people are lacking any sense of being loved at all, it's going to have a hard time. They're going to have a hard time hearing what we have to say about God. The Salvation Army puts it perfectly. Soup, soap, salvation. If someone's hungry, they can't hear what you have to say. If somebody feels dirty and worthless, they can't hear what you have to say. So you meet those needs, and then you invest in these people. And then when it is time, you bring the message of God forward. And that's what Nehemiah did. He did the work to restore their relationship with God. So that's what I want to look at today. As we finish up the series, this idea of restoring what has been lost. And we see Nehemiah do today is do that work to bring that restoration, to bring restoration of a relationship with God. And I think if we look at the entire Nehemiah story, along with what we see today, it shows us how we can enrich our own relationship with God, how we can help other people to restore their relationship with God, and how we can help other people discover that a relationship with God is even available, because so many don't even know that. And one of the things that we always want to keep in mind is that when we talk about being out of a relationship with God or not being in a relationship with God, it's not because God left. God's always there waiting for us. No matter what we've done, no matter how sideways our life has gone, God is always there waiting for us. But God doesn't force himself on us, that he allows us to live our lives the way we choose to. So if we choose to live out of relationship with God, God will respect that. But if we want to actually live in the fullness of relationship with God, then we've got to be part of that process. We have to invest in it. We have to choose to step into that relationship. We need to embrace that relationship. We need to be active members of the relationship. And once we do that, we begin to see the power of God in our lives. And as we help other people do that, it helps them to see the power of God in their lives. And the thing that Nehemiah realized is that the people in his region, the people where he had been placed, didn't have that relationship. They had lost sight of it somehow. So he knew they needed that restoration. But there's something kind of funny about what was going on there, is that if we were to go up to that city, so if we lived 2,500 years ago and we walked up to that city of Jerusalem and we looked around, we would say, what do you mean you don't have a relationship with God? You've got all the elements that are required for a relationship with God. Because remember that part of what devastated them is that when they were conquered, something very important to them got destroyed. The temple got destroyed. But remember that by the time Nehemiah gets there, that temple had been rebuilt years earlier. So they had a temple. In other words, they had a building. There was a building right there that they could go do faith stuff in. There was a building right there that they could come together in, that they could actually launch work into the community in. The building was sitting right there. Yet somehow, the people in the region still had to embrace the relationship with God. And then also, years earlier, faith leaders had shown up and come in. And those faith leaders had shown up, and they had been talking at the people for years about God, telling them everything they had done wrong and all the ways they needed to change. Yet nothing seemed to change. How could that be? How could they have all those elements? Their temple, their faith leaders. Yet somehow things never changed. I mean, there must only be one answer. These people are impossible. It must be all them. It must be that having all of this, all these elements, if they couldn't find a relationship with God, it must mean that there's something wrong with them. That if all of this didn't bring the community together in a relationship with God, if having all this didn't cause people to seek a closer relationship with God, if having all this didn't cause people to see the love of God, the only answer is they must be lost. These people must be impossible. But Nehemiah didn't buy that. Nehemiah didn't believe that those things alone were enough to make a difference. Nehemiah believed that a different approach was required. Nehemiah believed that a long-term, people-focused, personal approach was required. Because Nehemiah knew that a relationship with God is essential to people. And without a relationship with God, people are not going to live in the fullness of life that's available. And Nehemiah believed that that relationship is available to everyone. And the thing that gave Nehemiah power and opportunity, he believed it for people who didn't even believe it for themselves. That he believed in people more than people believed in themselves. He believed that God would move in people's lives more than those people believed that God would move in their lives. And Nehemiah was certain that the community that he was a part of, that God had brought those people together for a purpose. He had brought them together to be in a relationship with God, to care for one another, invest in one another. And then as they cared for one another and invested in one another, and they grew in their own relationship with God, that would empower them to move into the region where they lived and begin to bring the message of God in a way that would start to transform lives. That he understood that as those who embrace God in their lives fully embrace that relationship and grow in that relationship, they begin to demonstrate what's possible in a life that embraces God in our lives. And that starts to show the people around us what's possible. That's what Nehemiah believed was available for everyone. And again, the thing that Nehemiah does that's so important, and I believe this is the fundamental core differentiator in why his approach succeeds. He's always focused on people. He never rushed to push the God stuff forward. He made sure the people were okay first, and he gave it time. And what we see happen is that Nehemiah gives us a really important pattern that we can follow to start to bring change into lives around us. As we've already said, the first thing he did was he met their immediate needs. In his case, those immediate needs were security. These people needed to have security, so he did the work to provide that. He then built the people up, helped them to see that they were valuable and that they were valued. And he continued to invest with those people. And here's the thing. He stuck with it. He was never looking for the exit. He viewed that his purpose was to stay here for the time it took to do what was necessary. And again, if he would have focused just on fixing the wall, the time it took would have been 52 days. He stayed for more than a decade with those people. And he took time, and here's what he did. Before he got kind of too far forward, he built relationships around the community. He spent the time to build up trust with people. And he continually invested in people. And only as that process grew and strengthened, only then did he take that next step of doing the work to start to build people's relationship with God. And then even as he did that, he did it differently than the others had done it. Because of this people focus, what he did is, as opposed to just saying that, here's a bunch of words, I'm going to read them at you, here's what God says, here's what he says you should do. That's not what he did. He focused on understanding. He focused on helping people to learn and understand. He wanted to make sure that people understood that what God was calling them into was relationship, a personal relationship, an individual relationship. So what he did is he actually created these teaching sessions. He actually brought the people together with the faith leaders. And this is what he tells us happened. So the faith leaders read from the book of the law of God and clearly explained the meaning of what was being read, helping the people understand each passage. Now, one quick aside, the book of the law of God sounds like some big scary book that nobody really wants to read for fear of what you'll find, sort of thing. The book of the law of God is simply their name for the first 5 books of the Bible. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Remember that the Bible didn't just show up as one book one day. It was assembled over time. These first 5 books, they call the book of the law of God. So basically what they're doing is they're teaching from the Bible. But their focus is always on, how does this apply to you? And what he does is that the way they do it is they point back to the stories. Because those 5 books include the stories of their ancestors and what God had done in the lives of their ancestors. And it includes stories of the relationship that their ancestors had developed with God. It would include the incredible stories like Abraham, who walked so closely with God. And it also included the guidance that God gave on how to live a life that is healthy and full. But the emphasis was put on understanding. It wasn't just about reading it. It was about knowing what it means to me. How do I take this information and apply it in my own life? That's where the focus was placed. And the key to that approach of focusing on how do I apply it in my life is so important, because the path from wherever someone is to relationship with God is different for all of us. There are common elements that we'll see show up in various lives, but each of us kind of walks our own road. And so it's important that people be able to internalize it and see it personally. And that's where the focus was placed as Nehemiah led the teaching of the people. And that's what we try to do here each Sunday, is to take this to something that can seem so abstract sometimes and so hard to identify with sometimes. And we anchor ourselves in the Word of God, and we read what God has to say. But then we step back and say, those words are important, but what do they mean to me? What am I supposed to do with that? And that's what we're trying to build up as we go through each week as we come together. And that's what Nehemiah led the faith leaders there to try to do, to help people see the availability of that relationship with God and how to live in the fullness of that relationship with God. Now, as they did this, did that suddenly fix all the problems of all the people who were standing there? Of course not. It takes time. But it started a process. And here's the key. We already know that Nehemiah is not a man who gives up easily. And so he stays with it. As I said, he stayed for more than a decade investing in these people because he knew that persistence was also important, that people need time. Because as this happened, yes, some people embraced that relationship quickly. Other people needed more time. They just had to hear it more. They had to struggle through it more. And in fact, if you read through those last couple chapters of Nehemiah, something actually kind of shocking happens. As they start to teach people about the relationship with God, some people fall into deep regret as they look at what was available and how they've lived their lives and how they've suffered through life when that wasn't necessary, that there were other options. And people get caught up in regret of, I lived that way and I could have had this. But they spent the time with them to understand that that's okay. What we do, we celebrate when we find restoration. We don't regret what's going on in the past. We can't change that part. And they took the time to do that. In fact, Nehemiah's advice to those who were most regretful, throw a party. Throw a party and celebrate that you have found a new way forward. That's what he told them to do. And over time, change got deeper and deeper into the community, and things got different. People got a closer relationship with God. So what's interesting is that if we think about the timeline we looked at last week, these people had been suffering with pain and challenges for over 100 years. And so many times over all those years and all those generations, they had gotten so hopeful that something was finally going to change. We built the temple. That's going to fix everything. And it didn't. And we got faith leaders in. That's going to fix everything. And it didn't. Now, things are changing. A community is starting to discover its connection with God. The people of God are beginning to see a richness in their own life as they begin to connect with the people around them. They're all beginning to experience restoration. All these lives are changed. The one possibly changed the most of all is Nehemiah's, because of his willingness to invest in the lives of other people. And it's interesting is that if we look at all that Nehemiah has done, there's actually a quote that's commonly attributed to Francis of Assisi that kind of gives you this kind of high-level roadmap for bringing God into a region. What St. Francis says is, you start by doing what's necessary. Then, do what's possible. And suddenly, you're doing the impossible. That's exactly what happened with Nehemiah. He started by doing what was necessary. Basic security was necessary. Without that, they could never move forward. So he took care of that. Then he did what was possible. He invested in these people and helped them to understand that they were valuable and valued. And then as he continued that path, what seemed impossible, this community growing into relationship with God, began to happen. That is the basic path of how we reach people. But Nehemiah also had something else going on underneath this. I think there were kind of, although this is those kind of high-level steps, I think there were 5 key elements that Nehemiah had in his life, that if we would actually take these 5 elements and make them a daily part of our life, I believe we can be part of the same sort of things we saw Nehemiah do. The first one, people. I've said it time after time all throughout the series. People, people, people. People are what matter. There's no cause more important than people. There is no outcome more important than healing people. Nehemiah focused on people. Remember when we first met him in the very first week of this series, his heart broke for what's happening to those people. And then, prayer. Once he had that broken heart, he reached out to God in prayer, and he looked for direction from God on what to do, and he asked for success from God as he did these things. Purpose. He had a clearly defined purpose. His purpose was to bring healing to these people. And as I've kind of pushed on so much today, the fact that the purpose was healing the people was so important. Had the purpose been just to fix a wall, they wouldn't have been any better off because they needed so much more than just security. And so that was so important. Preparation, we know that Nehemiah didn't mess around. Before he got started, he looked at what had to be done. He pulled the resources together. He put together a plan to get it done. And then even as they started to engage the people about God, he again had prepared and put together a plan so they could actually focus on teaching and understanding, those sort of things. And then finally, persistence. He doesn't give up. We know as he met opposition, he didn't give up. As time went on, and what was a 52-day could have been called a victory became well more than a decade, he stayed with it. He persisted. And the thing is that these aren't steps in a ladder. These are elements of life that Nehemiah didn't go, okay, I got the people part done, check that off. Oh, did a prayer, check that off. No, they were incorporated into his life, and he revisited these constantly. If you read through the book of Nehemiah, you see him often tossing up these like really one-sentence prayers of God, I need this. We need to do this. Those sort of things. So if we can incorporate this in our lives, and we make this central to our lives, I believe that the sort of things we see happening with Nehemiah are available to all of us, because we are all called to do something. We each have a personal call on our lives, and we also have a call as the community of God on our lives to bring the love of God and relationship with God to the region where God has placed us. Nehemiah shows us how to do that. I believe that if we will embrace that, we can be part of something just as amazing as what we see happen in Nehemiah's life.